Welcome to Integrated Medicine Perspective. I'm Dr. Wendy Liu. Today, I wanted to share a question that I encounter very often. Is red meat good or bad? So let's talk about the benefits and the potential drawbacks of red meat. Let's begin with the benefits of red meat. Number one, red meat is rich in protein, approximately 26 grams of protein in 100 grams of cooked red meat. That is roughly 3 ounces. Number two, red meat protein is very easy to absorb. Generally speaking, animal protein is easier to absorb than plant-based protein. Number three, red meat is rich in essential amino acids, which our body cannot make. We have to obtain them through food sources. It is not only important for us to have an adequate total protein intake, but also a sufficient amount of essential amino acids. Number four, red meat is rich in vitamin B12. Just 100 gram, 3 ounces of red meat can satisfy a person's daily vitamin B12 need. Number five, red meat can be a good source for iron. Even though red meat may not be the richest source for iron, but its iron is in the form of heme, so it's very easy to absorb, making it a great source for iron. Number six, red meat is rich in zinc, which is not as abundant in the most plant-based foods. With so many nutritional advantages, why does red meat have somewhat a negative reputation? That is because epidemiological studies found correlations between red meat consumption and certain diseases. From chronic inflammatory diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis to coronary artery disease, stroke, dementia, and even cancer, red meat consumption was found to have certain correlation. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. A study published in the Journal of Arthritis and Rheumatology in 2004 reported that the surveyed population, those with the highest intake of red meat, consuming more than 58 grams per day, a little bit under 2 ounces per day, had a 98% higher risk of developing inflammatory polyarthritis compared to those with the lowest intake, consuming less than 25 grams per day. Another study explored the relationship between diet and colon cancer. The association between red meat intake and colon cancer is quite evident. For every 100 grams of red meat consumed daily, the risk of colon cancer increased by 22%. Finally, this is a study published in JAMA Internal Medicine in 2020, which investigated the relationship between the intake of different types of meat and the risk of cardiovascular disease and mortality rate. Consuming 8 ounces or 227 grams of red meat per week increased the incidence of cardiovascular disease as well as the all-cause mortality rate by 3% compared to not consuming red meat. Although this increase may not seem as significant as the impact of red meat on colon cancer risk, it is important to note that the red meat intake varied between the two studies, one being 100 grams per day and the other being 220 grams per week, which averages to only 32 grams per day. Therefore, we cannot conclude that the impact of red meat on colon cancer is greater than its impact on cardiovascular diseases by these two study results. On one hand, red meat has nutritional advantages. On the other hand, epidemiological studies provide us contrasting information. So, with our daily lives, should we eat red meat? What should be the right amount? Before we talk about the recommended red meat intake, let's first find out how big of an impact there would be by adjusting red meat intake. I will use one article to show why this question is important. Let's use the article on inflammatory polyarthritis. Besides the correlation between red meat consumption and the incidence of inflammatory polyarthritis, there was a clear correlation between total meat consumption and the total protein consumption and the disease risks. Individuals who consumed more than 88 grams of total meat per day had a 130% higher risk of developing inflammatory polyarthritis compared to those who consumed less than 49 grams per day. The difference of red meat intake between the highest and the lowest group was only 39 grams, which was a little over 1 ounce. Now, let's look at protein intake. Those who consumed more than 75 grams of total protein per day had a 190% higher risk compared to those consumed less than 62 grams per day. The participants in this study had an average weight of approximately 70 kilograms. That means their daily protein requirement was only around 56 grams. Even the lowest intake group most exceeded the recommended daily intake of protein. Interestingly, the study also found a reverse correlation between fruit consumption and vitamin C consumption and the occurrence of inflammatory polyarthritis. Individuals who consumed less than 76 grams of fruit per day had a 110% higher risk of developing inflammatory polyarthritis compared to those who consumed more than 171 grams per day. But within the range of 76 grams to 171 grams of fruit intake, the incidence of inflammatory polyarthritis was the lowest. Similarly, those who consumed less than 56 grams of vitamin C per day had a 180% higher risk compared to those who consumed more than 94 milligrams per day. However, it is still the intermediate group with vitamin C intake ranging from 56 milligrams to 94 milligrams had the lowest incidence of inflammatory polyarthritis. The recommended daily intake of vitamin C is 90 milligrams for men and 75 milligrams for women. In other words, a vitamin C intake close to the normal range had the best outcome in terms of inflammatory polyarthritis. From the analysis of the protein and vitamin C data in the study, it appears that the population with intake closest to the normal ranges had the lowest disease incidence. In addition, red meat consumption was not the sole contributing factor to the risk of inflammatory polyarthritis, raising the question whether by adjusting red meat intake alone would solve the problem. Therefore, I would still emphasize on the importance of a complete and balanced diet. And the completeness and balance of a diet can only result from the combination of various foods, not just one single food. We should not focus all our attention on adjusting a single food intake to prevent a specific disease. For instance, in the paper of food and colon cancer risks, dairy intake was linked to a lower risk of colon cancer. But in the paper of inflammatory polyarthritis, dairy intake was linked to a higher risk of the disease development. So the issue is often not about whether to eat or not eat a certain food, rather about consuming it in appropriate amount. Similarly said by traditional Chinese medicine more than 2,000 years ago, moderation in diet and regularity in daily routines. Now let's talk about the recommended amount of red meat intake. The World Cancer Research Fund recommends consuming red meat less than 3 times per week with a total amount between 12 to 18 ounces of cooked red meat. That is roughly 350 to 500 grams of red meat. That does not mean we have to eat red meat or red meat is irreplaceable by other meats. Red meat is neither terribly bad or super good. Finally, I wanted to share my perspective on nutritional research, why we cannot use a single food or a single nutrient as the major study measure in nutritional research. Because when we do that, we often come to inconsistent study findings. While different research findings can be exciting, but they can be also very misleading. One day we might hear an apple a day keeps the doctor away, and the other day we will hear blueberries are actually the healthiest fruit. One day we might hear red meat can reduce anemia and promote muscle formation. The other day we hear red meat leads to coronary artery disease and stroke. I will use an analogy to show why using a single food or a single nutrient as the major study measure in nutritional research can lead to inconsistent results. Let's see, we have a relay race with people randomly assigned in groups of 4. If the fastest runner happens to be in a group with 3 other fast runners, the study result might be having the fastest runner is a crucial factor in winning the race. But if the fastest runner happens to be in a group with 3 slow runners, then the study result might be having the fastest runner may not necessarily be an important factor to win the race, or even having the fastest runner may reduce your chance of winning the race. So the same study measurement, having the fastest runner, the same study design, but you may get inconsistent result. The reason for that is the study measurement. The outcome of the relay race is much more related to team speed rather than individual speed or having one fastest speed. Similar principles apply to nutritional research. Nutrition is certainly a teamwork, not an individual sport. So individual food or nutrient intake may contribute to the overall health level of a diet, but its relationship with the ultimate health outcome is not going to be as consistent or as powerful as that between overall dietary health levels and the ultimate health outcomes. So I would recommend our focus should be on the overall health levels of our diet rather than the importance of a single food. That's all for today. Please leave comments and questions. I will see you soon.